Thank you very much, Bill, for being here.
Sure thing. Um, Basically, I've been in amateur radio for 52 years now. And particularly, I've been doing amateur radio high altitude balloons, basically sending amateur radio transmitters, video cameras, transmitters, TV transmitters, sensors, and student experiments into the stratosphere on weather balloons. I've been doing that for 33 years now. And so I'm going to show you some of what we do. And then I also have incorporated how amateur radio can work with astronomical events as well towards the end of the presentation. So let me bring up my PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. Share. And entire screen. PowerPoint. Let me know if this comes through okay. Can you see that? All right, good.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about how to send a balloon around the world in 14 days and also various weather balloon flights that are basically, they go up to 100,000 feet and the balloon pops and a parachute comes out, and that's what this is. This is a typical amateur radio latex weather balloon flight. And the latex balloons expand and expand. They could be about 8 foot in diameter on the ground. When they get it in the stratosphere, you're at 1% of the atmospheric pressure on the surface. So they're about 35 feet in diameter, and they finally just pop. The latex rubber just can't take it at that point. And then there's a parachute down below it. You can see right below the balloon, there's a parachute. Sometimes we put a cut down mechanism to cut the balloon away. And then we have various experiments that are below that. We have flown solar panel experiments to measure the efficiency of a new solar panel in a near space environment. It's actually simulates being in space on a satellite to within a fraction of a percent, actually. So this is a good platform to test sensors, and also large balloons like the government sends up telescopes, and they work pretty well for that, but they're several thousand pounds. Trying to keep something on that big of a platform that's moving with the wind steady takes a lot of heavy electronics and servos, but they've successfully done a lot of astronomy on high altitude balloons. So we work with the local University of Alabama Huntsville students, and they have a space hardware club. And you can be any discipline: meteorology, astronomy, biology, accounting even, because you have to figure out how much a flight's going to cost for their budget. And so we send these up from the Severe Weather Institute just across from UAH campus. And believe it or not, that on the right is an actual balloon payload that the students put together to look like a minion. But it was a functional payload with sensors, and the lights would light up. Can you imagine finding this in your field and the eyes are lit up at night? Be a little scary. But you can see the size of the weather balloon on the left. We carry up communications equipment. This is a Simplex repeater where you can send a voice up on VHF, and it stores it in that little device and repeats it. And you can use this as a way of extending ground communications out to hundreds of miles. This is an amazing photograph. We have an event where we gather together and present talks about high altitude ballooning, and we send up usually about 10 of these large balloons. Well, 2 of them stayed within 200 feet throughout most of the flight, and this one took a picture of my balloon at 53,000 feet above the Earth. If the government had tried to do this, it would cost $1 million, and they would probably have to get another $1 million because the first efforts would probably fail. But we were just super lucky. This is an extremely rare shot of a latex weather balloon in the stratosphere. Even at 53,000 feet, you can see the blue haze of the Earth's atmosphere, and right above it, the blackness of space. So that's right about the point where you enter the stratosphere is where you start to see the blackness of space, and your atmosphere is at just that thin blue haze. Now this is the view in the stratosphere at about 85,000 feet. And now you see that thin blue atmospheric, thin blue line of the atmosphere is very thin indeed now. And so now we're above most of the Earth's atmosphere, and you can see it's really quite spectacular. And so we send up experiments. One of the students, the big game at that time was Angry Birds. And so they decided to send up an angry bird into space. So we're actually near space. We don't quite make it to space, but we're kind of close. So this is an angry bird in the edge of space. So the balloon pops, the parachute comes out, and this rarely happens where it lands out in the field and we just go right out and pick it up. You can see the size of the parachute and the experiments right there in the open field. These are the usual landing sites for balloon payloads. You've got on top of an apartment building, way up in a tree, or in a horse pasture with the horses trying to eat the payloads. So that's a typical latex weather balloon flight. So we decided to, there's a new aspect now that electronics have become very miniature now. We came up with a very lightweight transmitter with a GPS on it that sends down the position of a party balloon. Well, not any party balloon, but those silver foil balloons that stay inflated for a week or more. The 3-footers are the biggest ones they make. But you have to keep your payload under half an ounce. So we made them totally solar powered. So there's a GPS receiver, a microcontroller, and a transmitter section there. And then I put a supercapacitor with the low solar angles. This is the full blown Skytracker, as I call it, and 2 flexible solar panels. The total weight is 12 grams, less than half an ounce. And it's small enough now that you can actually put it on a party balloon and track it. And it sends down on the amateur radio frequencies a mode called APRS, Automatic Position Packet Reporting System. And there's a website called aprs.fi. There are ground stations listening on this frequency on VHF on 144.39 megahertz all over the northern hemisphere. And so they pick up the transmissions, and it's sent to a central server, and it displays on a map. It's very easy to launch. One person can do it. See, that's the size of the balloon, just a 3-foot, $3 party balloon. And that's, so you can see by comparison, the size of my tracker. I make it as lightweight as possible. I actually make the circuit board a 1/3 normal thickness, and the solar panels and are super lightweight. They're flexible panels, and I've got guitar string for the antenna elements. There's a little close-up of it just as I'm getting ready to let it go. So how far can these go? Well, they go up to the jet stream. The balloon pressurizes. You're really only inflating the balloon about 1/4 of the volume as normal, because that will expand as it goes up in altitude. And once it hits about 30,000 feet, it will be completely inflated and will level out at that altitude. I just use a small 40 cubic foot tank of helium or hydrogen. Hydrogen works a little better, but a lot of schools won't allow hydrogen in their school, and that's understandable, so we have to use helium. I buy these from my local welding shop, and they're pretty reasonable. So my first flight to launch from Huntsville, Alabama went basically the same path as Lindbergh did. Once it hit Newfoundland, it went across to near Paris, in France, taking 33 hours. Exactly what Lindbergh did. And then it stayed up for a total of 6 days and ended up hitting a snowstorm, an ice storm off of Stockholm, Sweden, and came down. Now, one thing that I have a problem with on this APRS mode is that the frequencies change depending on what part of the world you're in. So I have to have a geofencing algorithm. I draw a box around the United States, North America, or Europe. And once I'm in that box, my computer says, oh, I have to switch the frequency of the transmitter. And the GPS tells me the location. So that works out pretty well for us. But I have to keep track of a dozen different frequencies because every different area has a different idea of what the national frequency should be for APRS. Plus, we have do not transmit zones in the world. Yemen, North Korea, but believe it or not, the United Kingdom is also a do not transmit zone because for some reason they don't allow airborne operation of amateur radio transmitters. Probably a holdover from World War II, but they still don't allow it. So you can see the geofencing box I put around the United Kingdom, and there's an example of a real world flight that hit the edge of that box and stopped transmitting. When it came out to the other side, it started to transmit again. Here's another example. We flew across North Korea, and I stopped transmitting before North Korea, and once it went on the other side, it started to transmit again. We're just trying to prevent having these little balloons causing World War III. So these float in the jet stream. Here's an example of what the jet stream looks like for a particular time of the year. I use windytv.com. This is a great site also for looking at cloud cover. It's a nice addition. I know a number of you probably use cleardarksky.com for viewing, but this also gives you an idea of when there's going to be clear skies. There's a whole bunch of options on the right for cloud cover and wind and storms. So it's windytv.com, or sometimes I think it's just windy.com. Either one will work. So that's a handy site. Am I still coming through okay?
Yes.
All right. So we use this interesting website by NOAA, which is used to predict where, like you have a volcanic eruption, you want to know where the path of the particulates are going to go. And this same website is useful for predicting where one of our balloons that are floating in the jet stream will go. So here's an example of a forecast. You see the balloon, once it left the East Coast, was going to go in a big loop. And it actually did that. So this is a really neat website called tracker.habhub.org. Stands for High Altitude Balloon Hub. And this is, you'll be able to see all the balloons that are currently flying, amateur radio balloons that are currently flying in the entire world. So this is a useful website if you want to track these high altitude balloons. There's a little bit bigger balloon that's available. It's more expensive. It's about the size of a leaf bag, made out of a special sushi wrap that's very impermeable to helium and hydrogen leaking out of it. and called the SBS-13 by scientificballoonsolutions.com. And so we decided to send one of those up. They go higher. They go about 12 kilometers, or about 43,000 feet. And so they're above most of the weather. Here's an example of one being launched. And being that high, you are now at much lower risk of being knocked out of the sky by a storm. So I love to use these balloons, even though they cost about $150 or so, because they can stay up for weeks, sometimes months, and occasionally a year or more. So I talked about that APRS system, which is a VHF frequency. So it's line of sight. You're only going to get about 250 miles in radius of reception, which when you're over the oceans, you're not going to get any reception. Well, there's another mode that we've been using called Whisper, and it's the same kind of algorithms used in the Deep Space Network for getting data from things like Voyager. So this allows a very low power, high frequency HF transmitter. And I had reception reports from this from on the other side of the world. Here's an example of one of my balloons over the center of the Atlantic Ocean being received in Perth, Australia. And that was almost exactly the other side of the world from that location. So it's a really neat mode. And I get data from these balloons every day. And there's a site called whispernet.org that collects the data from their receive stations monitoring this HF frequency on 14.0956 megahertz. And they display it on a map. I wrote a Python script to grab this raw data, decode it, and reformat it to go to the tracker.habhub.org website, and also aprs.fi. So that way it shows up just like it's one of those VHF APRS balloons. And you see that little blue circle, that's the actual range if it were a VHF or a line of sight. But it's being received in Japan in this case. So one of these balloons with the bigger balloon, it stayed up for 75 days, went around the world over 6 times. And you can see the flight path. It's all very consistent around just east of Japan. They're all bunched up over the Western Pacific, but over the rest of the world, it can go just about anywhere. And on its last orbit around the world, it actually went south of the equator twice and hit a violent thunderstorm in the Ivory Coast of Africa. So I know where it is, within about a 2-mile area. If you want to go out after it and risk the jungles of the Ivory Coast, you can go out after it. Because it was still transmitted for a couple of days after it hit the jungle. So we usually go to this a convention called the Dayton Hamvention. It's a gathering of 30,000 ham radio operators, and we launched one of our Pico balloons, and they have this huge antenna that looks like a spider web. It's called a hex beam. And 1,000,000 to 1 shot, that's where my balloon and transmitter ended up. Got snagged up in the spider web. And they shook that antenna back and forth, lowered it up and down, and it finally came off, and then it hit a power line. Sat there for a couple of minutes, finally got free of the power line. An hour later, it got almost knocked out of the sky by a thunderstorm. Then it finally made it, and it went all the way to Turkey after 11-day flight. So that was the little balloon that could. So we like to get youth interested in the STEM fields and amateur radio and amateur astronomy. And so these are some students from Atlanta, Georgia that have been participating in these flights. We did an event for the spring equinox, where student groups around schools around the world launch these little balloons, and in 15 locations. We even had two in Australia, one in Argentina. We had several in about 12 in the United States and Thailand. So we had a fair amount of the world represented, and we had a ham and radio operator come to the school and help with each launch. And the teachers and the students could track these flights during their classrooms and see what countries they were flying over. Audrey and Jack's balloon stayed up 80 days and went around the world, I believe 4.5 times. And so they were second place. Another balloon stayed up 130 days, launched from a school in Utah, and went around the world about 7 times. So we call this, Audrey does a lot of video about her balloon activities for a group called Youth on the Air. So that's Youth on Amateur Radio on the Air. And we also go into schools. This is this is the 6th grade class in a school here, West Point Middle School in Coleman, Alabama. And they could follow it on their smartphones. If you get if they can watch it on their smartphones or iPads, you have them hooked. So they would follow the flight every day, and you can see how excited they are. It's basically is just as excited as if they'd launched a rocket into space. And theirs went all the way to Morocco. And then students at a middle school in Minnesota, they used one of those bigger balloons. They went 6 times around the world, and they went 2 times around the world, and they were the very first middle school to circumnavigate the world with an amateur radio balloon. UC San Diego students, they flew their balloon, stayed up 3 months, and went around the world 6 times. Now we host an event called the Great Plains Superlaunch, and groups from around the world show up. We inflate about 10 weather balloons and several of these Pico Balloons. And no, that's not Orion. Those are 7 weather balloons in the sky all at once. It kind of does look like Orion. So we did a really interesting thing in 2017. Imagine some of you went to see the total eclipse of the sun. We went to Clarksville, Tennessee, and these are actual images that my brother took of the eclipse. And we flew balloons into it. I'm going to show you a large latex balloon that had an near-infrared camera on it, showing the shadow of the moon on the ground in its entirety from a perch about 100,000 feet above the Earth. And he launched this from Idaho. I wanted to show you the path of the eclipse. There were over 100 balloons sent up to monitor the eclipse with cameras and sensors. And you can see the path of the balloons is actually in sync with the path of the eclipse. So there it is. That's the view of the moon's shadow on the Earth during the peak of the eclipse. You can see the entire totality. And that's a pretty awesome view from 100,000 feet up in the stratosphere. So we decided to launch 3 of those Pico balloons. And so we launched those just prior to the totality to measure the temperature changes and when the solar panels would drop out. They actually stayed up for several days and ended up off the coast of the United States, off of Cape Cod. And you can see there, after flying for several days, they were grouped together no more than about 10 miles apart. Now, another thing we do with amateur radio, let's say you're out looking at the Perseids meteor shower, and it's cloudy, and you're missing the big storm that happened this last time. So we bounce radio signals off the ionized trail, and can you talk to somebody off that trail 1,000 miles away or more on VHF, when our normal line of sight is about 30 or 40 miles. So it's a brief transmission. The trail lasts just sometimes a half second, sometimes a few seconds. On the lower VHF frequencies, it can last 30 or 40 seconds, and that's enough to make a fairly good contact. And so you'll be listening to nothing but static, and all of a sudden there'll be this loud signal from the other side of the country. So it is a really exciting. So even though you can't visually see them, you can actually hear them and talk through them. And this is an example of a fellow in near Tucson, of the contacts he made through meteor scatter, all the way up to Washington State and North Dakota, when his normal range is going to be about 30 or 40 miles on the ground. There are some sites in the Arctic where they actually use meteor scatter. They used to use it to send data where there weren't any telephone lines between two sites. There'd be enough meteor trails during the given day to get enough data through to send messages back and forth. So that's a little snippet of amateur radio and how we can work with meteorology and astronomy. So if you have any more, would like some more information, you can contact me at my ham radio call sign, WB8ELK @gmail.com. And that actually is something we did for the Weather Channel. We launched a fellow in an easy chair on 66 weather balloons to 14,000 feet. And this was we modeled the chair. A friend of mine modeled the chair after the old easy chair in the movie animated film Up. He got the drawings from Pixar and created his own chair to duplicate that old man's chair. So he stayed up there for 9 hours and flew 150 miles and landed near Ellijay, Georgia, launched from Decatur, Alabama. So he came down and was bouncing. To come down, he would cut a balloon away, and go back up, he would drop off water ballast. So on his way out of the field there, he landed in Ellijay. He was almost neutrally buoyant, so he could bounce 10 feet in the air, and about 100 cows were coming at him thinking they were going to get fed. So our chase team rescued him right before the cows got to him. So I'm going to stop sharing and take any questions and answers here.
Bill,
Hey, say about what all you're doing.
Hang on just a minute. I'm going to turn the light on here. Okay, that's a good question, and then usually the main question I get, and that is, there is provision under FAA Part 101 that allows for upwards of 6 pounds per payload, a total of 12 pounds, to be flown on balloons without having to get special permission from the FAA. If you want to fly something bigger than that, which I have done for NASA, it takes about 3 months of paperwork, but you can get permission, and then you have to call. You have to be directed just like an airplane. You have to call the flight centers and let them know where it is.
I understand that by flying. You have to have a license, and
these are weather experiments. It's under the guise of weather experiments and student experiments, so we don't have to have those restrictions of the drones. The FAA Part 101 clearly states what you can do with weather balloons.
Do you have to have AIS or SIF or anything like that to identify you? And
No, even when we're going under a waiver, we report the position to flight service and the different towers, different areas that we go through. We only have to report it once it goes until it goes above 60,000 feet. Above that is uncontrolled airspace.
pilot seeing UFOs, you know.
Well, you know, some of these may have generated some UFO reports. I see every once in a while a UFO report on the news and says, anybody know what this is? And it's a weather balloon.
Bill, your circuit boards, do you seal them anyway, or are they just out in the elements and they're fine?
Well, that's a good question. At the altitude, there's very little moisture unless a storm or you're going through a storm cloud. If you're going through a storm cloud, you're going to come down anyways. So it's a pretty dry environment unless you're going through a storm cloud. And once again, that's why these bigger balloons work better for staying up longer than a couple of weeks. I've had the little silver balloon stay up for 3 weeks. In fact, I had one of them go for launch from Kansas. It went out through Mexico up the west coast of the United States. 2 weeks later, it came back to the exact launch site in Kansas. Now, by that time, I had driven back to my home in Huntsville, Alabama. It then proceeded to go 2 days later. It flew directly over my house and my work in Huntsville after flying 5,000 miles and being up in the air for 17 days. And that was at 30,000 feet on one of those little party balloons. So
A lot of about their tracking. Do what you use GPS or frequency you use? You can't. So.
I have two different frequencies I use, two different transmitters. It's the same board. I just have a different output filter and a different code in it. The APRS is on VHF frequencies on what's known as the 2 meter band or 144.39 megahertz. And it is line of sight. The maximum range is about 250 miles at 30,000 feet. And of course, it's a little bit more than that when you're at 43,000 feet on the bigger balloons. But you're right. You have to be, once it gets about 300 miles or so off the coast of America, it's gone until it hits Europe. And if it goes over Africa, you're never going to hear it for days or weeks. Believe it or not, there's a lot of activity. Well, there's a lot of activity in Europe. There's a fair amount of activity in Western Russia and even some activity in Siberia, but very rare. There's no activity at all over what I call the stands, Kazakhstan, all the stands, Pakistan. There's a little hotbed of activity in New Delhi, India. I'm a member of the New Delhi India Club now because I tried to gather interest there to track these balloons, and they have tracked several of them as they went over northern India. But then there's a fair amount of ground stations in China, Korea, and Japan. In the southern hemisphere, it's a lot worse, though, because there's only activity in Australia, Argentina, Chile, and South Africa. That's about it. And New Zealand.
What?
So what we did was I came up with some of you may have heard of WSPR. It's Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. It's a mode that takes 2 minutes to transmit on the 20 meter band, which is 14.0956 megahertz. And the skip on that could be thousands of miles. So you can get reception thousands of miles on a little 20 milliwatt transmitter, which is what this puts out. It's 17 feet up and 17 feet down. It's a half-wave dipole of 36 gauge magnet wire taped to fishing line. And that antenna weighs 3 grams. And it works very well, but you have to tune it right because if you get off frequency, it's not going to work too well. But I found that 17 feet 1 inch up and down works great. And we've had reception report on the other side of the world from that little 20 milliwatt transmitter. And typically when it's out over the middle of the Atlantic, I'm getting people in the United States picking it up as well as Europe all at the same time. So that funnels down. People have this program called WSJT-X. It's a free program. And when they receive these whispered transmissions and it takes almost 2 minutes for each transmission. That's sent to a central server, all those reports, called whispernet.org. And I grab that data with Python program that I wrote, and I send that to the APRS server so it shows up on the maps. And that it transmits every 10 minutes.
Afghanistan and Pakistan up in that area, dead. You can't even get Voice of America. I worked on a radio in the organization, but it was something trying to get a signal in and out of there.
Oh, I believe it. Because whenever even our HF balloons, when it's over Afghanistan and that area, we only get a couple reports a day, where normally over the United States we get it every 10 minutes. And they're very long range reports. I mean, they're like Norway and Australia. It's multi-hop.
Place for a radio telescope. It's so daggum dead up in there.
It would be better in Green Bank. Yes, it would.
Hills of the Himalaya mountains, So.
Yeah. But I do have a number of people in New Delhi, ham radio operators there, that listen on both modes now. And so that helps a lot. And in the Southern Hemisphere, we have one flying there right now that's, when they're over the Indian Ocean, they have a really difficult time. They only get a couple of reports a day. But actually, there's a great receiver at the Neumayer station in Antarctica, and it's operated by Germany. And they have a great reception there, probably because their noise level is so low. But they've been picking up my friend's balloon down there. I can.
On that, when you took the picture of the eclipse,
It wasn't so much guided. It does spin around slowly. I usually put 2 rods on it, like a tightrope walker, to stabilize it, but it's still a slow rotation. So it took many pictures, and that was the one that was pointing at. And that was my friend Paul Verhage did that up in Idaho with his camera. Our university had a camera as well, and I think hundreds of the balloons had different video systems on board to capture the images. But Paul's was one of the nicest ones I've seen of that, because you can see the entire footprint. I will share a map of the HabHub site and show you how many balloons are currently flying in the world. Well, let's see. Take a minute here.
Bill, you
All
say
right.
that the party balloons are just like you would go to one of the party places and buy?
Well, you can, but they won't probably work too well. Those silver foil balloons you can buy at party balloon stores, but I buy them from a website called balloonsfast.com. Because normally the party balloon stores only have the 18-inch balloons, and they're not big enough to carry our half-ounce payloads. You really need the 36 ones. Some of the larger party stores will have the 36-inch ones, but you want the silver ones, and Qualitex makes the best ones in this case. So I buy them from balloonsfast.com, and it's part number 12683. It's called Silver Foil Balloon, 36 inch.
And then one of your boards is how much?
About $149 for the APRS, $159 for the Whisper. And you can find out more information by contacting me at my Gmail address. Basically, my call sign at gmail.com.
You can't buy the plastic in that the one that's impermeable.
Well, you can.
And then make your own.
It's, Gunzi makes it. It's a company out of Japan, and it's called Heptax 525, and it's very hard to get here. It's used in food processing, and there's like you have to buy 1,000 feet minimum order or more, and it's very expensive. In Japan, you can get it just anywhere, but here, that's my friends who run that Scientific Balloon Solutions company. They bought a big roll, and that's why they charge what they do for each balloon. And they have a custom heat sealer that makes a wonderful seam. You try and heat seal this with an iron, the chances of having leaks can be pretty high. So they used to hand seal them, but now they developed a machine to do it that makes a beautiful seam every time. So I'm going to share the screen here and show you what this tracker hub site looks like. Hang on a second here. So can you see the Hub's website there that I'm showing? Okay, this one, N0MPM-13, is one of my Skytrackers that a group in Pella, Iowa launched for their high school. And it has been around, it's been flying for well over a month and a half, and it's been around the world multiple times. And you can see over on the left, you can see it's at 43,435 feet. It's got 12 satellites. The voltage is 4.6 volts, and it's 15 degrees centigrade because you got a lot of solar heating. It's not really that at that altitude, so it's about minus 40. But the sun, the solar radiation heats up the chip, so it stays pretty warm. And they've had 1,513 position reports since they launched. And I'll zoom this out a bit. And there's one launch from Canada, almost right on top of them. A bunch that was just launched from Missouri. Looks like a school project there. We have a few over the United States. The Europeans do a lot of balloons. Sweden, that KD2 over the Gibraltar there. He's been around the world several times, and that's a school out of New York. He's also using one of those larger balloons. So basically, you can find a flight. Here's my friend in launched from Argentina. He's almost to Australia. He's got a little problem with his altitude, though. His GPS keeps showing the wrong altitude. So some of these are latex flights. Some of these are the Pico flights. You can tell on the left, the ones that are just flatlined are the Pico flights that are at a particular altitude, whereas the ones that are a latex flight, they go up and they come back down. But this is a great little site, and you can see all the balloons that are flying around the world. of these for radiosondes as well. But the site is a little different, but it shows all the radiosondes that the weather bureaus are sending up. And we actually go out and recover those for fun, because they give they're on UHF frequencies, and they launch them from Nashville and Birmingham. And in fact, a lot of the Nashville ones end up in the Chattanooga area, as well as Birmingham during the right winds. And so you can listen on 403 megahertz and track these down. We also send up an ozone sonde, and they're very costly, but they send one of those up every month from our students here at UA Huntsville. And those land in the Chattanooga, Cleveland area a lot. So if you ever want to get into that, let me know, and I'll give you some information on what frequency to listen for and when they fly. And then APRS, this is APRS FI. If you know the actual call sign, you can enter it in here and then track just that balloon. So for example, this is the one that's over Mongolia right now. It was going 109 miles an hour, so it was really moving right out. During the winter months, they can go upwards of 200 miles an hour ground speed. My internet's just a little slow, but I'm just giving you a 1 week path. The one that was launched from Cleveland. A week ago, it was over Labrador, and you can see its little zigzag path over the Atlantic, and now it's over Mongolia. And this evening, it should probably show up over China. So there you go. Those are two different sites that you can look at here for a minute, and you can enter just one particular balloon and look at the entire flight path for it. So let's look at that. Look at N0MPM-13, which is the one over the Pacific right now going in circles. And look back from the entire flight. And you see it's been doing a lot of loop-de-loops. And in fact, it's oddly enough, it did a figure 8 a month ago over the Pacific, and now it looks like it's doing another figure 8 a little farther west this time. And then you can actually click on it to see how many days it's been locked. Well, should work. Let's see. He's actually only been around the world. He's on his second loop. So let's see when he actually launched. He launched this on August 3rd. So in a month's time, a month and a few days, it's been around the world 1.5 times, even after doing loop-de-loops. And you see he actually went up to Greenland on one of those flights. Well, back to you, and see if there's any other questions. Still with me?
How's your project going at work?
Oh, I work on the space launch system rocket, and we're doing pretty good. We're getting ready to launch Artemis 1, which will be the the unmanned mission around the moon. It'll be our first test flight. So I work on the flight software and avionics testing for the core stage, which most people call that the main stage of the rocket. And so we do that here at the Marshall Space Flight Center. And we're getting ready to launch that Webb telescope. That ought to be interesting. So our second flight, Artemis 2, will be the manned version. But we want to shake everything out on an unmanned mission around the moon and back and make sure everything's working great.
Great idea.
I've been working online 17 months now for another few months. I get a lot, actually, even more efficient working at home than now. We do have a few on site where they virtually. Yeah, a fair amount of us have been working from home. Teams is more, it has a few more features. Oh, this is pretty neat.
Yeah, we use Teams at work also. But yeah, Matt's the one that found this for us. This is neat. And Bill, this is Ralph, and I really do appreciate you doing this. And Kevin's corner, he's been trying to get me.
Been what?
You tried to get me to contact you for a couple of years now. I think he ran into you at a ham.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is great. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to pop in. I think I've got this crappy internet connection on this end. But yeah, I'm definitely interested. I've talked to you before about doing the possibility of something with BAS and with Beads of Courage. So we'll talk.
Okay. That far away.
No, true. Last I talked to you, you were planning on heading to the rocket build. So it might be beneficial, at least for a little while longer.
Yep. If this will come through, I'll try it. Short video on the SLS, but I don't know how it's going to come through on. But I can try it if you want it. If I can make it work.
Go.
Let's see what happens here. All right. It's black.
We will return American astronauts to the moon, not only to leave behind footprints and flags, but to build the foundation we need to send Americans to Mars and beyond. Rise up and seize the day. Blue sky will